Welcome back, everyone, to the Muslim Glory podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the greatness of the Mali Empire. My name is Raisa Ghazi. I'm an award winning public speaker and content creator, and I'm really excited to tell you today about the Mali Empire. I've spoken about them before when I was talking about how Muslims came to the Americas before Columbus did, because they have a really impressive history in navigation and exploring, but they also have a really impressive history in their own country while they were not exploring. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to go over a few topics. First, I'm going to tell you the basics of them because I think it's very important for every person, especially Muslims, to know about the basics of the Mali Empire. Like, you should be able to, speak about that. Like, most people know how to speak about the Roman Empire. The Mali Empire was bigger and it was more prestigious and it was a Muslim empire. So it's important for you to know that. The weird thing is that it was actually of the likes of the Emirate Cordoba, the Cordoba Emirate. It was of the likes of Cordoba Emirates, but also what Iraq used to be when they had House of Wisdom. But yet you will see that most Muslims do not know about the Mali Empire. And I would say it's a little bit of racism on the part of us Muslims. It's also obviously the colonial erasure of the place. The French took over eventually, and it was not in their interest to remind the people of the greatness they came from. But as Muslims, we are reviving, the history of Muslims in Europe. We are reviving of the history of Muslims in all other parts of the world. But I don't think we talk enough about the Mali Empire. And so you have to pay attention. You have to memorize these facts, and you have to talk about it in real life. Okay? Promise me that. Okay, basically, we're going to talk about back then. Okay, first, we're going to talk about back then because the most interesting part is kind of, when they were the Muslim Mali Empire, which isn't just Mali, it's more countries. And I want you to know about this Islamic civilization, a golden civilization. They had a golden age. And it was just a hub of knowledge, of wealth, of Islamic values and principles. And it was like a world center, like we have world centers nowadays, like New York, London, Dubai. Mali was one of those for many centuries, and they were Muslims. They were Black Muslims. I think it's super cool that we have them, as part of our impressive Muslim history. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview. They had a huge empire from the 13th to the 17th century, and the countries that it stretched over, I'm just going to read them out for you. I mean, obviously I should know them by heart, but it's Senegal, southern Mauritania, Mali, northern Burkina Faso, western Niger, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, the Ivory Coast, and northern Ghana. So that's really good to know. And so Mali had kings, and a king would be called a Mansa. And the most famous king they had was actually Mansa Musa. And we will talk a lot about him because he was really cool. Like, he was like a romantic king. He was a just king. He was like a victorer, he was taking over lands and making the empire bigger, but he was also a very generous king. There's so many stories about him that are just like, he's a role model, and I like it when people are asked, about role models or people they find impressive, that they would like whip out this name and be like, yeah, it's Mansa Musa, like I think that should be the case. But okay, just throwing some ideas out there. Okay, so especially during his reign, the Mali Empire was like flourishing. And it was established by his father, and that was Sunjata Keita. So he was the founder of the Mali Empire. And the movie, okay, well, we'll get to that, but the movie Lion King was actually based on him, but they lied about it afterwards. So anyways, what made this empire so big and so like flourishing is because Mansa Musa was a very strict ruler when it came to like corruption and criminality. And so he really made sure that all the traders and all the people, the citizens, the rulers, the women, that they could live in safety. And I think that's really beautiful because, like Islamically speaking, obviously bad behavior is usually you cannot really get away with it in most Muslim countries. And so this was another one of those countries. And I do think there's a connection between punishing people harshly a little bit and empires who flourish. And so I think that, with his army, who was highly trained and with like these strong principles, of integrity and justice, he was able to double his entire empire, Mansa Musa. And I think that's a really interesting example to have. So yeah, but then another thing, like he was obviously mega rich. Mansa Musa, he is the richest man that has ever existed until now. I mean, the latest numbers that I checked, I think were of the last few years. And so I checked like these list of inflation adjusted wealth list of for, who's the richest person in the world. And basically right now he would still be the richest person. I do think that Elon Musk, I think, is getting there, and like some of these other billionaires, because I think, as the world is getting more corrupt, obviously people are finding more ways to exploit the people and to make money off of them. And yeah, that's something that they didn't have at that time. I think also that he was a very just ruler. So I do find it way more impressive that he was able to build wealth. He was worth $400 billion right now. And I think that's very impressive. And so, yeah, it spread like long and far. One of the most famous stories about Mansa Musa, you absolutely need to know this. This has been recorded in many different books because there's books written by Western scholars. One of them is African Kingdom. Kingdoms is actually a Muslim scholar who wrote it, a historian. But also you have the scholars from way back who wrote about the Mali Empire, like Ibn Battuta did. I think Ibn Khaldun wrote about it, who is the founder of political science. Ibn Battuta is like one of the most famous travelers that the world has known, and he also wrote about the Mali Empire. But there's also a lot of these African historians, professors from the West who have written books about this. And it's definitely worth reading. I had one that was specifically about Mansa Musa, because there's also other very impressive African kingdoms. There were 3 specifically that were incredibly big. I think one was the one of Ghana, the other one was of the Songhai. But Mali, I think, was the most interesting because they're Muslims. So obviously, I'm zooming in on that. But you should know about this because it's very important to know. But basically, the story about Mansa Musa, where he traveled to Mecca because he went on pilgrimage, is a very famous story because he's known as a very charitable king. And that's really cool because he was the wealthiest man in the world, but he was also incredibly charitable. And so much so that when he traveled to go to Hajj in Mecca, he would actually pass by Egypt and then have to go to Saudi. Well, then back then it was in Saudi, but then he would give out so much gold that they actually caused gold inflation for 12 years in these different parts of the world. MashaAllah, I thought that was so cool. And the thing is, he wasn't just doing it I can just miss this part. He was literally giving away everything he had with him. And they had thousands of kilos, I believe. I think it was thousands of kilos of gold that they were carrying with them. And they made sure that they gave everything away. And so much so that by the time he received the news that his empire was under attack, the Mali Empire, they were under attack by the Songhai Empire, which was their neighbor. He had to rush back very quickly. And at that time, he actually didn't have enough money to buy supplies because he was being so generous. And he didn't really think about, this situation. And he was just thinking about, spreading his wealth. MashaAllah. And another thing I think is really cool about him is that he was known to be dressed majestically. Not just him, every person who traveled with him, who was part of his court, the people were dressed very well, which Islamically speaking, we are also supposed to do, right? If Allah blesses you, you have to also show those blessings in the way that you appear and, like show that Allah has actually given you something. And he did that. And it's also, Allah loves beauty. And so that's also another thing that he, I guess, carried out very well. And there's so many other things that he carried out very well. Also, the way he treated women. And you might have heard it already in one of the videos, but basically he treated his wife like an absolute queen. And I mean, we have similar stories of our prophet, peace be upon him, treating, his wives as queens, serving them, feeding them, entertaining them, being their, shoulder to cry on. We have those stories as well. But then we also have Mansa Musa, the richest man to have ever lived, who is also like a beautiful role model, a black king, And yeah, I think that's really important to know. So let's see. Okay, so that was just the basics, I guess. Well, it's not really the basics. It's a lot already. Okay, so one thing that I think is really cool is the Mandingo people. I might have told you about this before, but the Mali Empire consisted, amongst others, of the Mandingo people. And Mandingo is a language, they speak Mande, I believe. Mandingo tribes. And I think what's interesting is that the Mandingo people also are found in Suriname in South America, because I don't know if you've caught this, but I did a podcast about Islam in Suriname. And basically there are like tribes of Mandingo living in the forest in Suriname, because some of the escaped slaves, which is like it's like a concept in Suriname that slaves would escape. They would just break free and they would live in the forest. And some of these people who broke free and like managed to like make their own little village in the forest of Suriname actually came from the Mandingo tribes. And so I think that's really cool. I wish I get like one time an opportunity to talk to them, because I think I really want to know what they know about themselves, because this is so cool. Like their history is just like the history of one of the greatest people in the world. And I hope they know that, because I just think it's cool, like they deserve to know it, because like end of the day, Black people worldwide, also in Suriname, they receive a lot of abuse and they are discriminated a lot. And I don't think it's useful to always like remind them, oh, slavery, slavery, slavery. Why don't we remind them of this? Why don't we remind them that they were, one of the most impressive civilizations in the world, that they were more impressive than, the Roman Empire or the British Empire? Like, why don't we talk about that? And I think that's more useful for them to hear about than all of these like negative things like, oh, slavery, oppression, oh, you're just like, nobody wants you to be in their company. It's not good. And that's why I do think like diversity, equity, inclusion can be very harmful, because if you're constantly going to brainwash a person into believing that all they were was like treated like an animal by their colonizer, like how do you think that's going to affect them? Like research by actual professors in psychology have told them like this is not good for you, because if you think of yourself in that situation only, you will not be able to rise to your potential. And I think Candace Owen has spoken about this as well, because she said that, Black people in the US, for example, they were thriving in the US. They were thriving, doing really well, being more successful than their white counterparts. But that when the government started implementing all these policies where they were like, oh, we need to help the Black people because they're so like, undereducated and underdeveloped, that's actually when things went south with that community. And so I think people need to be aware of that. Muslims need to be aware of that. Like I used to be all about, like we're always being oppressed. We're always being oppressed, because I thought that was a solution. But then I realized nobody is feeling powerful when we talk about that. And when I started talking about like Muslim history that's like very grand and prominent, I get all these reactions where people are like, I feel so proud, like I feel so happy to be who I am and I feel so strong. And even I myself, I think when I started learning about this, like I started walking differently in the world, because I was like, you know where you come from, all the things that your people have been able to achieve. Like it's really healthy, and like one time I don't know if I read a research. Yeah, I think I saw a video of someone explaining why like Jewish people tend to be very successful. And I think the person explained that it's because they truly believe they are the chosen ones. When you believe you are like the chosen ones in the world, it makes you walk differently into the world. And so, yeah, I think especially for Black people, this is really important. You don't just have to have Mali roots. You can just be from Africa, but you just need to know that the greatest empire the world has seen, it was your people, okay? That's really important. Okay, so okay, one thing I do have to mention about this yeah, about Islam in Mali is that they did tend to kind of like mix the non-Islamic things into the religion, I guess to accommodate a lot of the non-Muslims. Like that's a thing that happened in Mali. But I talked about this before with you guys as well, right? They also did it in India because they wanted to accommodate Hindus. Like kings wanted to accommodate Hindus, and then they started implementing things that were not Islamic just to make sure the Hindus would also feel like they could go to Islam. But that's not really fair to Hindus because you're actually kind of like lying about your religion. But also it's not good for Muslims because you're corrupting your religion. And I mean the same has happened to Christianity, where they wanted to invite all the pagans, and then they started incorporating all these pagan traditions, which in the end it waters down your religion. I don't think you should do that. Okay, anyways, they did do that. Like elements of dance and like pagan rituals were part of the Islamic religion in Mali. And I think that that's something that, African Muslims, they really need to think about that. This wasn't just done because that's Islam. Like it's actually a part of the corruption of Islam, just so some rulers could get more, I guess, power, which is it's just like it's wrong. It was already wrong, but that makes it even more a bit despicable. Okay, anyways, then I want to tell you a little bit about Disney and the Lion King. Basically, the founder of the Mali Empire was Sunjata Keita. And I don't know if you know this, but basically his name was Lion King. His nickname was the Lion King. And so the Lion King, which is the movie about, Simba and, Mufasa, I think is his dad, which are kind of like Muslim names, I believe, which takes place in Africa, is about the life of Sunjata Keita because, it was about this prince whose father passed away, and then the prince gets exiled to another land, and then he grows up very strong, and he actually comes back, defeats all of the people who were against him, and then has like a flourishing kingdom. And like this person, like Simba in the Disney movie, is actually a really kind-hearted person. He's very kind. He's very, he has a lot of authenticity and he's very genuine. That's how he comes across. And so that makes sense that it would be, based on the life of Sunjata Keita. But then Disney wanted to cover up this story, and they said no, it's not about him. Like even though it's literally his name, it's literally his continent, it's literally his story, it's not about him. That's what they said. And they said it was about Hamlet, who is like a character written by Shakespeare, I believe. And Hamlet, yeah, it's not at all. It is not at all a similar story. It was a prince, though, but he wasn't exiled. He did leave. Hamlet had a crush on his mom. He was abusive to his partner, manipulated her mentally, emotionally. And he was like mentally unstable. I think he stabbed people and he eventually died. He wasn't able to do anything. And then they're like, yeah, that's what the Lion King was about. But it's like, that doesn't sound like a Lion King, though. Doesn't sound like a king. It didn't sound like a lion. it sounded like they're trying to cover up that they wanted to steal the story of Sunjata Keita, but then they didn't want Muslims to actually know that this is their history. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not gonna lie. And I've talked about this before. They did the same thing to Pocahontas. Remember when they took the story of this girl who was the daughter of a tribal chief. I think her name was Aminut, and this story was about how they kidnapped a girl who was already married, and then she had to be with this older man who was like, I think like twice her age, John Smith. And they took her against her will to a different continent, to the UK. And over there, they paraded her around instead of, giving her her freedom. And so they did this because they wanted to, in the real life, this happened because they wanted to show to the people in the UK that they were friendly relations with the natives, and that's why they kidnapped her and took her against her will and paraded her around over there, even though that wasn't the story. And when Pocahontas was written, or like they actually made that movie about Pocahontas, they made it seem like there was an actual love story between John Smith and Aminut, which wasn't there. They didn't show that she was married, she was already happy, and that this man was twice her age, and then they took her against her will, human trafficking her. Get so excited. Human trafficking her to another continent. It's unacceptable. So yeah. Apart from that, there's another thing, like the, what is it called? Moana is another one of those movies where they kind of took indigenous culture. Disney did that, and then they didn't want to give them credit. They didn't depict them in like a fair way, or a way that's actually, shows what's going on. They made them look like very, I believe it was like very marginalized, like very fat and like uneducated and stuff. Like, it's just stupid, like, give these people their prestige and their beautiful stories instead of trying to hijack it and trying to brainwash them into believing that they're not the greatness that they were, right? And so, but I mean, I don't want to be really negative, but Disney doesn't have a great track record in general, because they are pushing a lot of agendas right now. So much so that they're actually trying to influence policy in the state where they are in the US, which is Florida, because they're one of, I think, the biggest private employers. So they know they can kind of push certain agendas. And basically, they have been accused massively, and this has been studied thoroughly, of grooming children through their movies. Honestly, it's really diabolical. I don't know what's wrong with them to want to do something like that. I'm sure it started off with a good intention at some point, Disney, I don't know, but it's really turning into something ugly. Okay, so that brings us to the next topic of Mali, and that's the last topic of this part of the let's see, the podcast, because I've talked about this before, but basically Mali is known for also traveling to the Americas, because Abu Bakari II, who is the brother of Mansa Musa, was actually the king. Initially, he was actually the king who took the throne from, or got the throne from, Sunjata Keita. But he was like a very passionate, like, learner and also traveler. And his goal was actually to spread a lot of his knowledge to other parts of the world. And so there are actually records in the Muslim world that he traveled to the Americas. And it's interesting because this is something that in Mali is well recorded. I think that's really cool. I hope all the people in Mali know this, because there's also one particular scholar. Her name is Diawara, and she actually argues that, he did reach the Americas, and that he lived there, that he took 2,000 boats, and he left behind his wealth in Mali, and that he had a successful life probably also over there. And so a team in Mali, a research team, they also tried to research this further. And they said that he left from Gambia, what is now Gambia, and he reached Recife, which is in Brazil. Yeah, I think it's really cool. There is a lot of evidence of this because they found, for example, spears, which are these like pointy sticks that they use for hunting, which were made of gold. And I mean, Mali was like the biggest owner of gold. Like half the world's salt and gold supply was in Mali at the time. And basically, they are saying that they brought that type of gold there, and when he got there, and also when Columbus got there and other of the explorers, they also recorded that they saw black people and people who dressed like, Muslims. So yeah, there's also an Egyptian scholar who wrote about this because he said that when his brother Mansa Musa came to Hajj and then he passed by Egypt, he talked about how his brother actually tried to cross the Atlantic, and so that's why they know that he went there. And I think, yeah, I think that's really cool. And so, it's really important that you also check out not just the Western sources, but also the sources that are available in the Muslim world. For example, this Egyptian scholar Al Omari, but also, these Mali researchers who are trying to do the work. For example, Husu Diawara is one of them. But then there's also a team led by Timoko Konate who are investigating Abu Bakr II's expedition. And yeah, the Egyptian one, Al Omari. So those are sources that are interesting to yeah, to look further into. What I understand is that there are also traditional oral historians in West Africa, such as Sadio Diabate, who have begun revealing these travels to the people in in their region, and so they're trying to talk about. Yeah, that this happened, and they're trying to fight these cultural taboos that you're not allowed to talk about it. You should be talk about it. You should be talking about it. Um, so I think one thing that I want to mention as a final note is that, Abu Bakr II, he's a very inspiring leader because he didn't just, cross the Atlantic to spread knowledge. And, from what we know from all the accounts we have, it was a very, peaceful encounter with the natives. It was one of generosity where they shared gold, but it was also one where they were seen as elite inside the community. So that's one thing. But at the other hand, you also have to take into account that he left behind, incredible wealth in Mali because he just didn't see that as more valuable than spreading knowledge, mashallah. And that is actually a very Islamic principle, the principle of sharing knowledge, because it's actually one of the, highest regarded actions that you can take as a Muslim, right? That you spread your knowledge with people. And like one of the most loved people by Allah is actually the people who have knowledge, but especially knowledge of their religion. And if he went there to spread also knowledge of their religion, that must have been a very blessed thing to do. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as a final note. During the next podcast, I want to continue talk a little bit more about, what the professors have said about what Mali did across the ocean, but also I want to talk a little bit more about what they achieved inside Mali. For example, with the university, that's incredibly impressive. But also I want to talk about where they are now and what the political situation is now. And so we're going to do that during the second part of the podcast. My name is Raisa Ghazi. I am a public speaker. I do this globally. And you can take the Speak Out course if you're interested in becoming a public speaker as well. And if you want to make sure you get this content as soon as possible, make sure to subscribe, watch me. I do these sessions every week, at least 30 minutes. Inshallah, I'll keep doing it. This is a Muslim Glory podcast, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Inshallah. Thank you so much.